For over a century, there has been a stretch of land deep in the heart of America where gold seekers didn't just go missing. Sometimes they were found without their heads. Tucked away in central Arizona, where the scorching sun beats down on jagged stone ridges and the horizon stretches endlessly without the comfort of a single tree, lies a place believed to guard a legendary treasure, the lost Dutchman's mine. It might sound like a Wild West fairy tale, a fireside yarn passed between cowboys as they drift off beneath a blanket of stars, but the truth is far more unsettling. Hundreds of people have ventured into those mountains, equipped with maps, canteens, and dreams of untold wealth, only to vanish without a trace. And when search parties have managed to find their remains, if they find them at all, one chilling detail appears again and again: their heads are missing. These aren't isolated disappearances or accidental deaths. They form a pattern of strange endings, many spanning across decades, unfolding under circumstances that defy logic. If just a few cases had occurred, we might blame wild animals, tragic missteps, or the brutal desert climate. But the number has climbed into the hundreds, and the location remains the same: the Superstition Mountains, a name that sounds as if it were plucked straight from an ancient warning. Locals say that anyone who enters those mountains with greed in their heart and treasure on their mind is followed by something. And if you look closely at the history of this place, you might start to think that warning isn't so far-fetched. So fasten your seatbelt as we dive into today's mystery. But first, you'll have incredible luck if you like and subscribe before this video ends. In April of 1958, central Arizona entered the harshest stretch of its year. Dry winds swept across the mountainsides, carrying with them a sweltering heat and burning dust that sliced into exposed skin like razors. Daytime temperatures consistently soared past 86 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sun hung motionless overhead, like a glowing iron disc with no intention of setting. Amid that searing, suffocating atmosphere, Deputy Sheriff Benjamin Cruz, a seasoned man familiar with the desert terrain but never dismissive of its dangers, was making his way slowly down an isolated trail, winding through jagged rock formations and brittle shrubs. His forehead was soaked with sweat, and though his hat was pulled low to block the sun, his eyes remained sharp, steady, and alert. His left hand gripped his service revolver tightly, while his right occasionally wiped his face, not because of the heat, but in preparation for the scene he was about to confront. Just a few hours earlier, Cruz and his colleague, Officer Joe Donaldson, had received an emergency call from two young men, visibly shaken and trembling. They claimed that while following a treasure map through the mountains, they had stumbled upon an abandoned campsite bearing signs of violence. Their fragmented sentences and eyes filled with a fear that couldn't be put into words. Cruz had seen that look before, and he knew one thing: people don't shake like that when they're lying. Donaldson had been ordered to stay behind with the two men, while Cruz followed their directions alone, hiking toward the location they had described. The rugged incline drained more of his energy than anticipated. By the time he arrived, he paused to drink the last drops from his nearly empty canteen, silently thankful he'd brought along a backup. Then he saw it, an old campsite, tucked behind a jagged outcrop of rock, as though someone had deliberately chosen a spot as hidden as possible. The sight before him carried an uneasy stillness that crept into every breath. On the dry, cracked earth, scattered signs indicated someone had been living there recently, but something was clearly off. A gun cleaning kit lay abandoned, its metal parts strewn across the ground as if dropped in a panic. Strangely, there were no shell casings to be found, and the gun itself, the item that should have accompanied the kit, was nowhere in sight. Cruz moved toward a small bent shrub where sunlight filtered through the brittle leaves and glinted off an object draped over a low branch. It was a military-grade sleeping bag, the kind used for long expeditions. As he knelt down to inspect it, his chest tightened. Inside were deep, dark stains of dried blood, blotched and uneven, as if someone had thrashed desperately in the stillness of the night. Not far from the sleeping bag were a few scraps of paper, torn letters, stripped of names or addresses. Cruz reached for his radio, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and unease, and instructed Donaldson to return to town and call for backup. he knew he had stepped into something far larger than a simple missing persons case. As he sank onto a nearby rock and lit his first cigarette in hours, a cold thought swept through Cruz's mind, one he couldn't quite silence. If we're lucky this time, maybe the victim's head is still there. Long before hand-drawn maps, gold-seeking expeditions, or newspaper headlines about headless corpses, the Superstition Mountains had already been hallowed ground in the collective memory of the Apache, a place no one dared tread lightly, not even for a single step. Lying just east of Phoenix, this mountain range is cloaked in jagged peaks as sharp as a predator's teeth, and deep, shadowed canyons where the wind howls through the rocks like the cries of restless spirits. For hundreds of years, the Apache believed that beneath the sun-scorched stone dwelled a vengeful thunder god, an ancient entity who lived within the earth itself, appeased only through absolute reverence, sacred offerings, and, at times, human blood. According to their legends, if the god were awakened, or if his domain were violated, his wrath would fall upon the land like fire, scorching the earth, withering trees, driving animals away, and causing people to vanish without a trace. But more terrifying still was the bottomless pit said to exist somewhere within the underground cave system, a gateway to the underworld, or more accurately, the Apache version of it, a place where souls were trapped forever, unable to pass on. To the native people, these mountains were not just sacred ground. They were a warning carved into bloodlines and passed down through generations. They kept their distance, refused to speak the mountain's name at night, and if someone happened to ask for directions to it, they would lower their heads in silence, or give a solemn look, as if staring at someone already fated to disappear. But to the Spanish who arrived in the 16th century, the Superstition Mountains were not sacred. They were a promised land. Whispers of an underground city of gold and untouched mineral veins lured Spanish expeditions to boldly cross Apache territory and enter the mountains. They came armed with faith, firearms, iron armor, and the Holy Cross. But what they did not bring was respect. History records that the first veins of gold were discovered within just weeks of searching. There was joy, elation, and then, just as quickly, there was silence. The soldiers tasked with extracting the gold began to disappear, only to reappear not with cheers, but as corpses. Their heads were missing, their bodies twisted, and their iron armor had done nothing to protect them from whatever force had torn them apart in the mountain's dark interior. The Apache hadn't ambushed them. There were no arrows, no flames, no footprints leading in or out. Only the terror etched into the faces of the survivors, and the headless dead strewn across the rocks like a grim message. This is not your gold. Eventually, the Spanish withdrew. They left with only a small portion of the treasure, and whispered tales of a curse in the stone. But like all legendary treasures, that temptation never truly dies. It only sleeps, waiting for the next one who dares to come looking, only to vanish, just as those before them. Into the rock, into the shadows, or into the silence that never ends. After the last of the Spanish withdrew from the Superstition Mountains, leaving behind scattered bars of gold in the dust and a lingering fear etched into memory, the range seemed to fall back into silence. But that silence was merely a facade, a thin veil stretched over a haunting that had never truly slept. Those who came after, though clad in no armor and bearing no royal decree, still carried with them something far more dangerous, the belief that they could outwit a curse that had already claimed so many. In the mid-19th century, a name began to surface in mining records, the Peralta family. A powerful Spanish-Mexican lineage with influence stretching across Mexico, the Peraltas believed they had discovered a legendary gold vein within the Superstition Range, a mine so rich it could sustain generations. And according to scattered remnants of documentation, for a brief time, they actually managed to extract a substantial amount of gold from the mountains. But the Apache, having remained patient for too long, no longer stayed silent. In a sudden and brutal assault, the entire Peralta mining expedition, including both workers and armed guards, was massacred. Records suggest that not a single person survived. The Peralta name would go on to become the final emblem of ambition extinguished on sacred ground, and their deaths served as a temporary punctuation mark, reinforcing the message that this mountain range would tolerate no further trespass. Time passed. Maps were lost, the gold vein buried beneath stone and blood. But nearly 3 decades later, a man appeared in Phoenix, unconnected to any expedition, carrying no soldiers, fighting no one, and he carried with him a cloth bag heavy with raw gold. His name was Jacob Waltz. Waltz was a German immigrant who lived simply, spoke little, and had an unusual habit. He would regularly disappear alone into the Superstition Mountains for days at a time and return carrying gold. No one knew where he went. No one could follow him. And, most importantly, he never revealed the exact location of where he mined. Over the course of his life, Waltz sold roughly $250,000 worth of gold to the U.S. Mint, a staggering sum for the 19th century. Rumors spread quickly, and the mine he had hidden away came to be known as the Lost Dutchman's Mine, despite the ironic fact that Waltz was not Dutch at all. When Jacob Waltz died of pneumonia in 1891, he took that secret with him to the grave. It's said that in his final moments he muttered a few vague words about landmarks, rock formations, shadows from trees, or the shape of a distant ridge, but it was too little to piece together a coherent path. From that moment on, the treasure shifted from a location into a curse. Hundreds of people, miners, war veterans, scholars, and journalists alike, have tried to retrace the steps Waltz may have taken. But almost all of them, whether armed with modern equipment or crude hand-drawn maps, have ended in the same deafening silence. Some simply never returned. Others were discovered weeks, months, or even years later, in conditions that no rational explanation could erase the chill from. Headless corpses, crushed bones, bodies suspended between narrow cliffs, as if someone, or something, had left a message for whoever dared to follow. Legends, no matter how strange, often leave room for doubt. But when names begin appearing in headlines, when bodies are brought back in blood-soaked canvas bags, and when the same pattern repeats itself across generations, skepticism slowly gives way to fear. The first recorded death linked to the Lost Dutchman's Mine occurred in 1896. The victim was a man with an oddly distinctive name, Elisha Revis, an eccentric figure who had migrated from California and built a small wooden shack deep within the Superstition Mountains. Revis lived in isolation. He didn't shave, he didn't cut his hair, and he wandered the canyons completely nude, carrying only 2 revolvers and firing at anyone who came too close. Even the local Apache, not easily intimidated, were said to avoid the territory around his camp. When his body was eventually discovered, it lay about 4 miles from his shelter, bruised and battered, but showing no signs of struggle. His head was no longer on his shoulders. Instead, it had been placed several feet away, resting atop a rock, as if watching its own body from a distance, with a chilling stillness. No one knew what had happened out there in the scorched ravines. The police found no leads. The file was closed quickly, but the legend was just beginning. In 1931, an amateur archaeologist named Adolph Ruth from Washington, D.C., announced that he had come into possession of an ancient map said to lead directly to the mine. He set out, fully equipped with supplies, firearms, and conviction. But as winter neared, Adolph still hadn't returned. His family grew concerned and hired a professional search party. That December, they found his skull, lying alone in the middle of the canyon with 2 bullet holes directly between the eyes. It was a detail that made any theory of suicide extremely hard to believe. A few weeks later, the rest of his body was found not far from the site, headless, limbs broken, and with a metal pin still embedded in one of the leg bones, confirming his identity. Yet his weapon was never recovered. And although the coroner's report concluded that Ruth may have taken his own life due to injury and immobility, his family firmly rejected the claim. He couldn't have shot himself in the forehead twice. In 1947, another man named James Cavey chartered a helicopter to reach an inaccessible area within the LaBarge Canyon. He set up a temporary camp with enough supplies for 2 weeks. But when the pilot returned to retrieve him, the provisions were untouched, and Cavey was gone. Months later, a group of hikers stumbled upon his body, wrapped tightly in a military blanket, suspended from a cliff face by a rope. The knot was firm and expertly tied, as though someone else had secured him from the outside. Once again, the head was missing. His clothes, identification papers, and money were neatly arranged beside the scene, held down by a stone, like a message, meant for someone. In 2009, yet another disappearance drew the attention of the press. Jesse Kappen, a 35-year-old man from Colorado, had spent years researching the legend of the lost Dutchman's mine, making several solo trips into the Superstition Range. On what would be his final journey, he left behind his car, wallet, and phone near a remote trail, and vanished without a trace. 3 years later, Jesse's remains were found wedged deep within a narrow crevice, a place unreachable from above, and with no visible access from below. No one could explain how his body had ended up there. There was no blood, no tracks, no drag marks, only silence. Once again, no explanation made sense. And these are only a few of the better-known names in a list that now stretches into the hundreds. Most of them missing, their bodies incomplete, and always far removed from any sign of ordinary human contact. The Superstition Mountains, it seems, don't merely swallow those who seek its treasure. It returns them, in part, like a ritual of punishment, or a sign that someone or something is still guarding what lies within. In recent decades, as the digital age gradually pushed ancient legends to the fringes, many have tried to explain the disappearances in the Superstition Mountains through more familiar causes: treacherous terrain, brutal weather, wild animals, or simply human greed without limits. And while these theories hold a certain logic, none of them can explain one thing: the accounts of what witnesses have seen, or not seen, yet still appeared in photographs, in memory, and in that unshakable chill that creeps in when night falls over the silent desert. It was a sweltering afternoon in mid-July when Nathaniel and a group of friends set out on a hike through the Superstition Wilderness Preserve. During their trek, they stumbled upon the wreckage of a crashed airplane, the remains of a tragic accident from 2011, in which all 6 people on board had died. They took a break, drank water, snacked, and like many visitors, Nathaniel pulled out his phone to take a few photos, one of which showed the group standing with their backs to the camera, posing in front of the wreckage. A week later, while casually showing the photos to his mother back home, she suddenly grabbed his arm and pointed to something he hadn't noticed. Behind the group, about 50 feet away, was the image of a man dressed in white, staring directly into the camera. Nathaniel insisted that no one else had been there that day. There was only one trail leading to the crash site. No one could have approached from another direction without being seen. In fact, the group had reviewed their photos immediately after taking them. So then, who was that? Zooming in only made the image more disturbing. The man's face lacked clear detail. His skin appeared unnaturally dark, either severely sunburned or badly scorched. His eyes were hollow, like deep pits, reflecting no light, and in one hand he held something, what looked like a faintly glowing lantern. Nathaniel recalled clearly, the sun that day was blisteringly bright. So where had that glow come from? It wasn't the first time visitors had reported a tall, gaunt figure wandering the desert at night, carrying a lantern, moving in absolute silence as if searching for something buried. Locals had begun referring to the apparition as the Lantern Man. And while no one knows what it truly is, his story has resurfaced again and again for decades, told in fragmented accounts by residents, park rangers, and even paranormal researchers who had camped in the region. And it wasn't just shadowy figures. Reports of strange lights have also emerged, glowing orbs hovering silently in the sky, only to descend behind the cliffs and vanish without a trace. Some claim they're meteors, others suspect classified military aircraft. But a few accounts suggest something entirely different. These lights made sounds, whispers, breath-like exhalations, or songs, sung in a language that wasn't human. One group of college students on a field research trip in the early 1990s even swore that at midnight, their entire party woke up at the same moment, startled by the sound of rocks being struck together, 3 knocks at a time, rhythmic, steady, and coming from directly beneath their feet, as if someone, or something, was tapping from inside the earth. A larger question has begun to take shape. Could it be that the Superstition Mountains are not merely hiding treasure, but guarding something far older, far deeper, and far more dangerous than anything humanity has ever dared to imagine. Looking back at the long list of strange deaths within the Superstition Mountains, one truth becomes harder to ignore. Something is guarding a secret in those rocks, and it does not belong to the world we understand. But perhaps even more unsettling is this: superstition is not the only place. Far to the north of the continent, where snow blankets the land year-round and glaciers cut through the earth like fractures in human memory, lies a region whose very name sends a chill through the spine: the Headless Valley. The name is not metaphorical. It is the grim result of a long, unbroken chain of decapitated bodies found in that place, a pattern that has stretched across nearly a century. Located deep within Nahanni National Park in Canada's Northwest Territories, this valley was once the sacred homeland of the Dean people, an indigenous group with ancient traditions and a deep bond with the natural world. For centuries, they lived in harmony with the forests and rivers, viewing the surrounding peaks as holy. But when Europeans surged into North America with dreams of gold, the balance was broken, and things best left untouched began to stir. In 1908, two brothers, Frank and Willie McLeod, gold prospectors from Alberta, ventured deep into the valley, drawn by rumors of untapped veins of treasure. Then they vanished. Nearly 2 years later, their headless corpses were discovered beneath a layer of rotting leaves and snow, just a few hundred yards from the Virginia River. Their skulls, like so many victims who followed, were never found. 10 years later, a man named Martin Jorgensen built a small cabin in the valley to begin mining. One winter night, flames erupted, the structure was consumed, and Jorgensen's charred, headless body was found in the ashes. No one knew what had started the fire. No one could explain the missing head. The Dean, who had lived with the valley for generations, were not surprised. According to their oral history, this land was once ruled by a race known as the Naha, ghost warriors, masked and terrible, who would emerge from the forest at night to claim the heads of intruders as trophies. To the Dean, Nahanni was never a destination. It was a warning, a place where restless spirits still roam and where living souls are not welcome. Beyond the bodies, travelers to Nahanni have reported encounters that are just as chilling. Strange voices carried on the wind, bizarre lights flashing across the sky like the universe blinking, and entire campsites abandoned. Meals still warm, but not a soul in sight. Some official reports even describe bodies found frozen beside still burning fires, as if they died of cold while in the very act of keeping warm. It's something no known science can explain. Much like the Apache of the American Southwest, the Dean believe their homeland sits at the boundary between our world and something else. A thin place. A place where reality itself might fracture, and whatever exists beyond that fracture doesn't need light or language to make people vanish without a trace. You might call it superstition, or hallucination, madness, or the mental strain of extreme isolation. But when dozens, even hundreds, of deaths unfold in the same brutal way, across lands separated by thousands of miles, yet joined by a single common thread, the silence where a head should be, then perhaps it's time to consider that something is happening, something logic has yet to grasp. In any mystery that spans centuries, people inevitably try to build theories. Some turn to science, others lean toward the spiritual. And then there are those who, after staring at the long trail of headless corpses, lost maps, and silent stares frozen in old photographs, are forced to wonder, could something larger than everything we know be happening, right beneath our feet? The Apache have long believed that the Superstition Mountains conceal a gateway to hell, a hellmouth that leads straight into endless darkness, where lost souls are imprisoned, where nameless entities dwell, and where something older than human history itself sits silently beneath the bedrock, listening to every footstep above. This isn't a belief held only by the Apache. The idea of a gateway to hell appears across countless ancient cultures, from the volcanic throat of Mount Hekla in Iceland to the ghostly Fengdu Mountain in China and the catacombs beneath the streets of Rome. But one of the strangest such places lies halfway around the world from Arizona, Hauska Castle, on the outskirts of Prague, in the Czech Republic. Legend has it that in the 13th century, grotesque winged creatures began appearing in daylight, hunting villagers in the open. A group of knights was dispatched to investigate, and what they discovered was a massive gash in the earth, so deep that no one could see its bottom. From it rose a stench, hissing sounds, and a darkness that seemed alive. Hauska Castle was built directly over that hole, but with a strange design. Every wall, battlement, and arrow slit pointed inward, as if meant to keep something in, not out. There was no kitchen, no barracks, no well. It was never meant to be lived in. It was meant to seal something away. Sounds like medieval folklore? Perhaps. But back in Arizona, where the sun scorches the land and modern cameras capture people no one remembers seeing, the parallels are becoming harder to ignore. Some paranormal researchers, after reviewing dozens of cases, have put forth a theory both extreme and difficult to dismiss entirely, that there is a group, or something not entirely human, that has been guarding the lost Dutchman's mind for centuries. In 1945, a treasure hunter named Barry Storm publicly claimed that he had been stalked by a hidden sniper for 3 days while roaming the Superstition Range. The mysterious figure, whom Storm referred to only as Mr. X, never revealed his face, but his bullets always came whenever Storm approached the most promising coordinates. Storm suspected that Mr. X was the one who had killed Adolf Ruth, the man shot twice in the forehead in 1931. But if that's true, a troubling question arises. Can one individual operate across so many decades without ever being caught? Some believe Mr. X wasn't a man at all, but a successor. A member of a secretive organization tasked with protecting the mine at all costs. A hidden order, perhaps descended from the Apache, or something even older, which sees the treasure as sacred and never meant to be disturbed. Others speculate that the gold doesn't exist anymore, or never did, that the mine was simply the perfect cover for something far more terrifying, a magnetic anomaly, an entry point into another dimension, or a fault line between realities, where time, light, and life itself do not behave as we know them. Of course, there are simpler explanations, that all of this is the result of accidents, isolated crimes, harsh environmental conditions, and media-fueled exaggerations. But as the saying goes, coincidence doesn't kill that many people. In the same way, in the same place, over hundreds of years, something is operating in silence. Maybe it's a creature, maybe it's a person, maybe it's a collective spirit, born from ambition, betrayal, and curses that were never broken. As the sun sinks behind jagged ridgelines and pillars of desert sand swirling with red dust, the Superstition Mountains return to their natural state of silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that feels like a quiet warning. And if there is anything that truly sets this place apart, it's not just the legends, not just the treasure, not even the number of bodies found over the years, but the fact that none of it has ever been fully explained. Over more than a century, more than 100 disappearances, headless corpses, and unexplained phenomena have been documented across the Superstition wilderness. And though journalists, investigators, spiritualists, and modern theorists have all attempted to offer explanations, the unanswered questions remain. Some believe it's all just a series of accidents, that those who died simply underestimated nature, or were misled by a fake map and a dream that was never real. Others believe these deaths are the work of human hands, serial killers, or secret organizations that guard the mine with blood and silence. But then there are those, people like you and me, who sense something more, that there are pieces to this puzzle that don't fit any theory. No killer has ever been caught. No gold has ever been found. And no one, not with modern technology, detailed maps, helicopters, weapons, or satellites, has ever walked away from that place with a complete answer. Perhaps that is the heart of the story, that some places in this world don't want to be discovered, and that some mysteries don't exist to be solved. They exist to test us. Just like Adolf Ruth once wrote in his journal, a few days before vanishing, "I didn't come here to find gold. I came here to find the truth." But maybe, in places like the Superstition Mountains or Nahanni Valley, the truth doesn't lie in stone, and it doesn't lie in gold. It lies in the price that each person pays, just to get one step closer. And if you're wondering whether anyone else will ever go back out there, the answer, as always, is yes. Because we, as human beings, with all our logic, our greed, our faith, and our longing to touch the unknown, will always walk toward the place no one dares to go. That's what makes us different, and that, perhaps, is exactly what makes us the next to be chosen.